London, spring, 1817. The grand ballroom of Ravendale House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their golden glow reflecting off ornate mirrors that spanned the height of the walls, multiplying the elegance and excess until the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. At the top of the sweeping marble staircase, Verity Caroline Ashcroft stood frozen, her gloved hand trembling against the cool stone balustrade, wondering if she had made the most foolish decision of her 21 years. Below her, the cream of London society swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels, their laughter rising like champagne bubbles through air heavy with the scent of hothouse roses and expensive perfume. She had not stood in such a room for 2 years. 2 years of imprisonment masquerading as propriety, of walls that closed tighter each day, of a stepmother whose hatred had taken root as the only constant in Verity's carefully diminished world. Tonight, she had defied that prison. Tonight, she would face whatever consequences came, because living in fear had become more intolerable than any punishment Vivian could devise. If stories of courage that defies cruelty and love that sees beyond society's lies move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. The murmurs began almost immediately, rippling through the assembled guests like wind through wheat. Verity descended 3 steps, then 4, her chin raised despite the familiar burn of judgment in 100 curious eyes. She recognized many of these faces from the years before her father's remarriage, when her mother, Lady Helena Ashcroft, had been the gentlest ornament of any gathering, beloved for her kindness rather than her beauty, though she possessed both in abundance. "Is that the Ashcroft girl?" Lady Sutherland's voice carried with deliberate clarity, her fan snapping open with the precision of a weapon being drawn. "I had heard she was unwell, too delicate for society," her stepmother claimed, though others whispered different reasons for her absence. Her companion, Mrs. Daphne Fairchild, leaned closer with the eagerness of a woman who collected gossip as other ladies collected porcelain. "I heard she has become quite wild, improper even." Poor Lord Reginald, such a disappointment after his dear first wife was so impeccably mannered. Verity's fingers tightened on the balustrade, but she continued her descent. She had expected this. Vivian had spent 2 years crafting exactly these whispers, planting seeds of scandal through careful insinuation and strategic silences that left imagination to fill the damning details. The truth, that Verity had been forbidden to attend any social gathering, that her gowns had been locked away and her invitations burned, that she had become a prisoner in her own home for no crime beyond being her mother's daughter, was far less interesting than the lurid possibilities suggested by her absence. She reached the ballroom floor, acutely aware that her gown, though beautiful, was 3 seasons out of fashion. She had found it hidden in the back of an unused wardrobe, overlooked in Vivian's systematic purge of anything that might make Verity appear attractive or worthy of notice. The pearl-colored silk whispered against her legs as she moved, and she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to her mother, whose excellent taste ensured that even an older gown retained a timeless elegance. "Miss Ashcroft." The voice came from her left, deep and measured, carrying an authority that made several nearby conversations falter. "What an unexpected pleasure." Verity turned and found herself looking up into eyes of startling gray-green, sharp with intelligence, and something else she could not immediately identify. Marcus Harcourt, Earl of Stratford, stood before her with one hand extended, his evening attire immaculate, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples despite his being only 33 years of age. She had seen him from a distance at her mother's funeral 3 years prior, standing respectfully at the back of the church, but they had never been introduced. "My lord," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt, "I fear you have me at a disadvantage. We have not been formally introduced." "A deficiency I have long wished to remedy," he said, and the warmth in his tone seemed genuine rather than merely polite. "Your mother and I were acquainted many years ago, when I was a student at Cambridge, and she visited with her brother, Professor Wycliffe. She was kind to an awkward young man more comfortable with books than ballrooms. I have never forgotten her grace. The mention of her mother brought a lump to Verity's throat. "She spoke of you," she said softly, the lie justified by the kindness in his eyes. Her mother had spoken of many people, always with generosity, always seeing the best in those around her. It was entirely possible she had mentioned a young Earl interested in classical studies. "Then you will permit me to request what I specifically came here hoping to secure," Marcus said, and the certainty in his words drew every nearby eye. "Your hand for the next dance." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Verity was acutely aware of Lady Sutherland's fan freezing mid-flutter, of Mrs. Fairchild's mouth forming a small, scandalized circle. The Earl of Stratford was not a man who danced frivolously. His discernment was legendary, his refusal to participate in the marriage market's machinations a source of frustration for ambitious mamas throughout London. For him to single out a woman who had been absent from society for 2 years, whose reputation had been carefully poisoned by whispered insinuations, was a statement of such magnitude that it would reshape every calculation made about Verity's worth and place. "I would be honored, my lord," Verity said, placing her gloved hand in his, and felt the room's temperature shift from cold curiosity to heated speculation. Marcus led her onto the floor with a confidence that suggested he did this regularly, though every whisper confirmed he most certainly did not. As the orchestra began a waltz, his hand settled at her waist, proper yet firm, and she became aware of how tall he was, how his presence seemed to create a sphere of protection around them both. "You are trembling," he observed quietly as they began to move, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Are you unwell or merely unused to such attention?" "I am unused to kindness," Verity replied before she could guard her tongue, then felt heat flood her cheeks at the admission. "Forgive me, that was inappropriate." "It was honest," Marcus corrected, guiding her through a turn with practiced ease. "A quality I value far above appropriateness. I asked Lady Ravendale specifically if you would be attending tonight, Miss Ashcroft." When she expressed surprise at the question, citing your stepmother's assurances that you were not well enough for society, I suspected there might be more to your absence than illness. Verity's heart quickened. "What made you suspect such a thing, my lord?" "Because I remember your mother," he said simply, "and I remember how she spoke of you, with such pride, such love. She described a daughter who possessed not only beauty, but strength of character, compassion, and a sharp mind. The rumors I have heard whispered about you these past 2 years describe someone unrecognizable from that portrait. Either your mother was deceived about your nature, which I find impossible to believe given her extraordinary judgment of character, or someone has been working very hard to paint you in false colors." Verity quickly blinked back the rising moisture. She would not cry, not here, not when this man had just offered her the first genuine defense she had known since her father had fallen under Vivian's spell. "Your observation is indeed keen, my lord." "I am observant," Marcus amended. "There is a difference. Observation requires only attention to what is actually present. And what I observe, Miss Ashcroft, is a woman of considerable courage who hired a carriage to attend a ball she knew would judge her harshly, who holds her head high despite whispers designed to wound, and who just admitted to a near stranger that she is unused to kindness. That admission tells me more about your recent circumstances than any gossip ever could." The waltz carried them past Lady Sutherland, whose expression had transformed from smug satisfaction to confusion as she watched the Earl of Stratford not merely dance with, but clearly engage in substantive conversation with the woman she had just finished disparaging. By morning, Verity knew every drawing room in Mayfair would be recalculating her social value based on this single dance. "You are staring rather pointedly at Lady Sutherland," Marcus observed with what might have been amusement. "Is there something about her you find particularly fascinating, or are you merely cataloguing those who will need to revise their opinions of you?" "The latter, my lord," Verity admitted, finding his directness oddly liberating. I confess I take a measure of satisfaction in it, which is perhaps unworthy of my better nature. It is human, Marcus said, though I suspect the true source of those revised opinions will not emerge until tomorrow, when I call upon you at Ashcroft House for the afternoon visiting hour. I trust that will be convenient. Verity stumbled slightly, and his hand at her waist imparted confidence that immediately steadied her. You intend to call upon me, my lord? Publicly? Is there another way to call upon someone? He asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice, even as his expression remained properly neutral for the benefit of their audience. I possess a certain facility for planning, Miss Ashcroft. If I wish to know someone better, I make that intention clear. If I find someone's company agreeable, I seek more of it. And if I believe someone has been treated unjustly, I make my position on that injustice equally clear through action rather than mere words. The music swelled toward its conclusion, and Verity found herself desperately wishing the dance could continue indefinitely, that she could remain in this small bubble of protection and genuine regard rather than returning to the cold calculation of the ballroom's judgment. But the final notes faded, and Marcus bowed over her hand with a formality that somehow felt more intimate than the waltz itself. Until tomorrow, Miss Ashcroft, he said clearly, ensuring those nearby would hear. I look forward to continuing our conversation about your mother's exceptional gardens. I have often thought Stratford Abbey's grounds could benefit from her approach to landscape design, and I would very much value your insight on the matter. It was brilliantly done, Verity realized. He had just provided her with social currency, suggesting not only that he valued her company, but that he sought her expertise, that she possessed knowledge worth consulting. He had transformed her in a single sentence from object of pity or scandal into someone of substance and worth. I would be delighted to discuss it, my lord, she managed, and was rewarded with a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look younger, despite the silver in his hair. She watched him cross the ballroom to join a small group of gentlemen near the terrace doors, aware that she was now the subject of intense scrutiny from every corner of the room. The dance had been bold. The promised call tomorrow would be revolutionary. And the mention of her mother's gardens, a passion project that had consumed Lady Helena's final years and produced the most beautiful private grounds in London before Vivian had ordered them torn out and replaced with severe geometric hedges, was a gift of acknowledgement that told Verity this man had not merely known her mother casually, but had paid attention to what mattered to her. Well, a new voice said at her elbow, and Verity turned to find a woman of perhaps 30 years regarding her with frank curiosity rather than judgment. That was quite the most interesting thing I have witnessed all season, and I have been to 17 balls, 3 soirees, and 1 spectacularly awful Venetian breakfast. Lady Eleanor Harcourt, she added, extending her hand. Marcus is my brother, and I have been trying to persuade him to show interest in some woman, any woman, for the past 5 years. You must tell me immediately how you accomplished what an entire parade of diamonds and heiresses could not. Verity found herself smiling despite her nervousness. I did nothing, Lady Eleanor. Your brother requested the dance, not I. Precisely my point, Eleanor said, linking their arms with easy familiarity. Marcus does not request dances. He does not single women out. He certainly does not make appointments to call the very next day. And yet with you, he has done all 3 within the span of a single waltz. I am absolutely fascinated. Come, let us find somewhere we can speak, without the entire room attempting to read our lips, and you can tell me why my infuriatingly particular brother has apparently decided that you are the most interesting woman in London. As Eleanor steered her toward a quieter corner near a potted palm arrangement, Verity caught sight of a figure across the ballroom that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Vivian stood near the refreshment table, her burgundy gown the color of old blood, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of concern that did not reach her cold blue eyes. She had not been invited, Verity knew. Lady Ravendale would never have included the second wife of a viscount who contributed nothing to society beyond gossip and manipulation. which meant Vivienne had found out about Verity's defiance and had come to drag her errant stepdaughter home before any damage to Vivienne's careful narrative could be done. But she was too late. The damage was done, the narrative shattered. The Earl of Stratford had already claimed his dance, already made his intentions public, already shifted the very ground beneath Vivienne's feet. And judging by the fury in those ice-chip eyes, Vivienne knew it. The conversation with Lady Eleanor was cut short by Vivienne's approach, her steps measured, her expression now transformed into maternal worry that would have been convincing to anyone who did not know her true nature. "Verity, darling," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of gentle reproach. "You gave us such a fright. Your father has been beside himself with worry when we discovered you missing from your room. You know how your delicate constitution requires rest and quiet." "I am perfectly well, Lady Ashcroft," Verity said, using her stepmother's title rather than any term of familial affection. "And I am precisely where I ought to be, at a social gathering appropriate for a woman of my age and station." Vivienne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. But you know how easily you become overwrought. Perhaps it would be best if we returned home now, before you tire yourself excessively. Miss Ashcroft has promised me a full accounting of her mother's approach to garden design," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, her tone pleasant but her eyes sharp as she assessed Vivienne. "I am hosting a small gathering of amateur botanists next week, and I have just this moment decided that Miss Ashcroft must attend as my particular guest. You will come, will you not, Miss Ashcroft? I promise we shall keep the schedule quite reasonable to accommodate any delicate constitution." The emphasis on the last two words was subtle, but clear. Eleanor had recognized Vivienne's tactic and was countering it with an invitation that would be impossible to refuse without causing more gossip than Vivienne could afford. To accept would acknowledge Verity was well enough for society. To refuse would require explaining what mysterious ailment prevented attendance at a respectable gathering hosted by an earl's sister. "How kind, Lady Eleanor," Vivienne said through gritted teeth, disguised as a smile. "I am certain Verity would be delighted, provided her health permits." "Excellent," Eleanor said brightly. "Then I shall send a formal invitation tomorrow. Now, Lady Ashcroft, you simply must tell me where you acquired that remarkable shade of burgundy silk. I have been searching for precisely that color for months." As Eleanor drew Vivienne into conversation about fabrics and dressmakers with all the skill of a general maneuvering an enemy into disadvantageous terrain, Verity felt a hand touch her elbow lightly. She turned to find Marcus had returned, his expression neutral, but his eyes conveying clear intent. "I believe I promised Lord Ravendale an introduction to the woman whose mother created London's finest private gardens," he said. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Ashcroft?" It was another public claim, another statement that she was worthy of introduction to their host, that she belonged in this company. Verity placed her hand on his offered arm and allowed him to guide her away from Vivienne, whose conversation with Eleanor had become notably strained. "Your sister is formidable," Verity murmured as they crossed the ballroom. "Eleanor has had considerable practice managing difficult people," Marcus replied. "Our father was a tyrant who believed women existed solely for ornament and breeding. She learned early how to defend herself with courtesy and calculation. I suspect she recognized something of her own battles in your situation." "How much do you know of my situation, my lord?" "Less than I intend to discover," he said candidly. "But enough to know that your stepmother fears your freedom more than she values your well-being. That alone tells me a great deal." Lord Ravendale proved to be a jovial man in his 50s, who remembered Lady Helena with genuine fondness and listened with interest as Verity described her mother's philosophy of garden design, which emphasized natural beauty enhanced rather than dominated by human intervention. The conversation attracted others, and soon Verity found herself at the center of a small circle discussing botany, landscape architecture, and the relative merits of English versus Italian garden styles. It was intoxicating, this simple act of being heard, of having her knowledge valued rather than dismissed or suppressed. For 2 years she had been silenced, her opinions unwanted, her presence merely tolerated when it could not be entirely erased. Vivian had been systematic in her destruction, first convincing Lord Reginald that his daughter had become willful and inappropriate after her mother's death, then gradually limiting Verity's access to society, until she might as well have been locked in a tower for all the contact she had with the world beyond Ashcroft House's walls. The evening passed in a blur of conversation and cautious hope. Marcus remained nearby, not monopolizing her attention, but making his continued interest clear through small gestures. A cup of lemonade procured without her asking. An introduction to an elderly duchess who had known her mother. A casual reference to his planned call tomorrow that ensured several prominent matrons overheard and would be watching to see if the Earl of Stratford proved as good as his word. When Vivian finally insisted they must depart, citing the late hour and Verity's supposed fragility, it was past midnight, and Verity had secured 3 additional invitations to events in the coming week. As she prepared to leave, Marcus appeared at her side one final time. "Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, he said quietly. "I will call, and I will expect to find you present and well. If for any reason you are prevented from receiving visitors, I will know that prevention was not your choice. Do you understand my meaning, Miss Ashcroft?" Verity met his eyes and saw the steel beneath the courtesy. He was telling her, and through her Vivian, that any attempt to reimpose isolation would be noticed and challenged. "I understand, my lord, and I thank you." "Thanks are premature," Marcus said. "I have done nothing yet beyond dance and make promises. Tomorrow we shall see if I am capable of keeping them." The carriage ride home was silent, Vivian's fury a palpable presence in the small space. Verity kept her eyes on the passing street lamps, refusing to show fear even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She had defied her stepmother, had reclaimed a small piece of her stolen life, and she knew there would be consequences. But for the first time in 2 years, she felt something that had been absent for so long she had almost forgotten its name. Hope. 3 days later, Marcus Harcourt climbed the steps of Ashcroft House at precisely 4 o'clock, aware that his visit would be observed and dissected by every household within view. The townhouse was elegant, but showed signs of neglect, the paintwork less pristine than it should be for a viscount's London residence, the brass fixtures requiring polish. He knocked, and the door was opened by an elderly butler, whose expression suggested relief at seeing a caller for Miss Ashcroft. "Lord Stratford," the man said, bowing. "Miss Verity is expecting you in the drawing room." Marcus followed him through an entrance hall decorated with portraits, his attention caught by a painting of a woman with kind eyes and Verity's delicate bone structure, Lady Helena, without question. Someone had relegated her portrait to a dim corner, replaced in the place of honor by a larger, more ostentatious painting of Vivian, draped in jewels and self-satisfaction. The drawing room was pleasant, though here too he noticed details that troubled him. Fresh flowers on one table, but dead blooms in a vase by the window, as though someone had arranged beauty in one spot while allowing decay in another. Verity sat near the fireplace, her posture perfect, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wearing a day dress of soft blue that complemented her coloring, but was, like her ball gown, noticeably outdated in style. She rose as he entered, and he saw the shadow of a bruise on her left wrist, barely visible beneath the edge of her long sleeve. His jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral as he bowed. "Miss Ashcroft, you look well." "Lord Stratford, thank you for coming." Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight emphasis on the word "thank you," as though his mere appearance represented a victory. "I said I would come," Marcus replied, settling into the chair she indicated. "I am a man of my word." They spoke of gardens, as promised, and he found her knowledge extensive and her passion for the subject genuine. Lady Helena had clearly passed on not merely an appreciation for beauty, but an understanding of the science behind it, the way different plants complemented or competed with each other, the importance of considering how a garden would look through all seasons rather than designing for spring alone. Your mother was an artist, Marcus observed. But an artist who understood structure and planning. The gardens at Ashcroft House were renowned. I visited them once, years ago, when I was considering redesigning Stratford Abbey's grounds. Your mother was kind enough to give me a tour and explain her philosophy. I have never forgotten it. Verity's eyes brightened with memory. She said gardens were about invitation rather than imposition, that we should work with the land's nature rather than trying to force it into unnatural shapes. She believed beauty and wildness could coexist if one was patient enough to find the balance. A philosophy applicable to more than gardens, Marcus said quietly. I notice the grounds here have been altered since I last visited. The current design seems to favor severity over invitation. My stepmother prefers order, Verity said, and the careful neutrality in her tone told him everything he needed to know about that preference and its application to more than landscaping. The door opened, and Vivian entered with a tea tray, her smile perfectly calibrated to suggest gracious hospitality. Lord Stratford, how delightful. I hope Verity has not been boring you with talk of flowers and soil. On the contrary, Marcus said, rising politely but keeping his tone cool. Miss Ashcroft's knowledge is extensive and her insights valuable. I have already determined to consult her regarding several planned improvements to my own estate. Vivian's smile froze slightly. How kind! Though I fear Verity's delicate health may not permit extensive travel to view your property. She tires so easily, you understand. I had not suggested travel, Marcus said mildly. Merely consultation, which can be accomplished through correspondence if necessary, though I confess I am puzzled by these references to delicate health. Miss Ashcroft appears quite robust to me, and I have it on excellent authority that her mother enjoyed extraordinary constitution and energy well into her final illness. Such qualities typically pass from mother to daughter. It was a subtle calling of the bluff, a suggestion that he did not believe the narrative of fragility and would not accommodate it in his interactions with Verity. Vivian's eyes hardened, though her smile remained fixed. Of course, every individual is different, she said, pouring tea with movements just slightly too forceful. I merely wish to protect my stepdaughter from overexertion. She is so precious to us. The word precious sounded hollow, a coin that rang false when dropped on a counter. Marcus accepted his teacup and continued the conversation, speaking to Verity as though Vivian were not present, making clear through subtle emphasis and directed attention where his interest and respect lay. It was a calculated performance, designed to demonstrate that he would not be deterred by Vivian's attempts to interpose herself between them. When he finally took his leave, he bowed over Verity's hand and held it a moment longer than strictly necessary. I am hosting a small gathering of friends tomorrow evening at Stratford House. Music and conversation, nothing elaborate. My sister Eleanor will be attending, and she specifically requested I invite you, Miss Ashcroft. I hope you will do us the honor of joining us. Before Vivian could manufacture an excuse, he added, I am sending my own carriage at 7 o'clock. It would be my great pleasure to ensure you arrive safely and in comfort. It was another public claim, another chess move that limited Vivian's ability to prevent Verity's attendance without creating precisely the sort of gossip Vivian relied upon controlling. To refuse the Earl of Stratford's personal carriage would require explanation, and any explanation would sound either churlish or controlling. How generous, Vivian said through clenched teeth. I am certain Verity would be delighted, provided she is well enough. I am perfectly well, Verity said clearly, her eyes meeting Marcus's with gratitude and something else he recognized as the beginning of real hope. And I accept with pleasure, Lord Stratford. Please convey my thanks to Lady Eleanor as well. Marcus departed satisfied that he had made his position clear. Verity Ashcroft was under his protection now, whether Vivian acknowledged it or not. And he intended to discover exactly what had been done to this remarkable woman in the 2 years since her mother's death, to understand the full extent of Vivian's cruelty, so that he might systematically dismantle it. The gathering at Stratford House the following evening exceeded Verity's tentative hopes and confirmed her worst fears about how narrow her world had become under Vivian's rule. Marcus's London residence was magnificent without being ostentatious, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and confident taste rather than desperate display. The rooms were warm despite their grandeur, filled with books and art that suggested they were chosen for love rather than investment. Eleanor greeted her with genuine warmth, introducing her to perhaps 20 guests who represented the most interesting rather than merely the most titled members of London society. There was a celebrated pianist, a poet whose latest work had caused scandal and acclaim in equal measure, a pair of elderly scholars engaged in heated debate about Roman military tactics, and a striking woman of perhaps 50 who turned out to be a noted travel writer recently returned from Egypt. Marcus holds that social gatherings ought to engage the mind rather than merely provide opportunity for display, Eleanor explained, guiding Verity through introductions. He finds the marriage market tedious and the endless parade of insipid conversation at most balls absolutely numbing. So he creates his own society here, people who are interesting rather than merely appropriate. The evening was revelatory. Verity found herself drawn into conversations about literature, politics, and art with people who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions rather than merely tolerating her presence. The pianist played Beethoven with passionate intensity, and Verity felt tears prick her eyes at the beauty of it, at the simple fact of being present for such a performance, of being allowed to experience beauty and culture after 2 years of deliberate deprivation. Marcus watched her throughout the evening with an attention that should have been unnerving, but instead felt protective, as though he was cataloging every moment of pleasure to understand what had been stolen from her and how thoroughly it needed to be restored. When the poet began reading from his controversial new work, Marcus appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine and a quiet observation that made her laugh. "He is enormously talented and insufferably aware of it," Marcus murmured. Eleanor invited him because his work is brilliant, but she has already warned him that if he attempts to seduce any of her female guests with tortured metaphors about their beauty, she will have him removed by footmen and ban him permanently. "Does he often attempt such seductions?" Verity asked, surprised into candor by the wine and the warmth of the room and the simple pleasure of being treated as though she belonged. "Constantly," Marcus said. He views resistance as a challenge and acceptance as vindication of his genius. Eleanor maintains that actual genius requires neither seduction nor vindication, which is why she continues to invite him while simultaneously threatening him. It keeps him on his best behavior, mostly. Verity smiled and realized it was the first genuine smile in longer than she could remember. "Your sister is remarkable." "She is," Marcus agreed, "and she sees something similar in you, I think. A strength that has been suppressed but not broken. A spirit that refuses to be diminished despite every effort to reduce it." The directness of the observation should have embarrassed her, but instead, Verity found herself meeting his eyes and answering with equal honesty. "Your kindness to me has been extraordinary, Lord Stratford. I find myself wondering why you have taken such interest in someone you barely know, someone whose reputation has been quite thoroughly destroyed by whispers you must have heard." "I have heard the whispers," Marcus acknowledged, "and I have examined their source. Lady Sutherland is known to be a close associate of your stepmother. Mrs. Fairchild repeats anything Lady Sutherland says with the discrimination of a parrot. The other purveyors of gossip about you are similarly connected, either directly to Vivian or to her small circle of similarly situated women who gain social power through the destruction of others' reputations." He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "When every negative word about someone comes from the same source, and when that source has everything to gain from destroying the subject's reputation, I become skeptical rather than convinced. Add to that my memory of your mother's character and my observation of your own behavior, which suggests none of the wildness or impropriety the rumors claim, and I am left with a clear picture of systematic defamation rather than justified social censure." Tears of relief pricked at Verity, of being seen and believed after so long being misrepresented and dismissed. "You are the first person to question the narrative," she said softly. "My father believes every word Vivian whispers to him. He thinks me a disappointment and a source of shame. He can barely look at me without reproach." "Then your father is a fool," Marcus said bluntly. "And that is said with all due respect to his title and position. Any man who would believe a woman he has known for 3 years over the daughter his wife spent 21 years raising is either willfully blind or catastrophically weak in judgment. I suspect in your father's case it may be both." The words were harsh, but their very harshness was a gift. A validation of feelings Verity had been taught to suppress as ungrateful or disloyal. "I should not take comfort in hearing my father criticized," she said. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "If the criticism is earned?" One of the great tyrannies of family is the expectation that loyalty must flow only in one direction, from child to parent, regardless of whether that parent has earned or maintained any claim to such loyalty. Your father has failed you, Miss Ashcroft. It is not disloyal to acknowledge that failure even as you continue to hope he might eventually recognize and rectify it. Before Verity could respond, Eleanor appeared with the travel writer in tow, and the conversation shifted to Egyptian antiquities and the challenges of documenting ancient monuments while managing local authorities and sandstorms in equal measure. But Marcus's words stayed with her, settling somewhere deep where they could begin the slow work of healing damage done not through cruelty, but through passive abandonment, through believing lies because they were convenient and failing to question because questioning would require uncomfortable acknowledgement of his second wife's true nature. The evening ended late, and Marcus's carriage delivered Verity home, with Eleanor accompanying her, a subtle statement that Verity was now under the protection of not merely an Earl, but his formidable sister as well. As they pulled up before Ashcroft House, Eleanor took Verity's hand. "Marcus does not act without purpose," she said quietly, "and I have never seen him so decisively engaged with anyone's well-being. Whatever is happening in that house, whatever your stepmother has done or continues to do, you are not alone in facing it anymore. Remember that, especially in the difficult moments." The difficult moments came sooner than Verity anticipated. She entered the house to find her father waiting in the entrance hall, his expression thunderous, Vivian standing slightly behind him, with an expression of sorrowful concern that made Verity's stomach turn with its calculated falseness. "Where have you been?" Lord Reginald demanded, his voice carrying the rough edge of too much port consumed while waiting. "Gallivanting about town like some common woman, bringing scandal to this house with your behavior." "I attended a private gathering at the Earl of Stratford's residence," Verity said, keeping her voice steady. "Lady Eleanor Harcourt accompanied me home to ensure my safe return. There was nothing scandalous about the evening." "Nothing scandalous?" Vivian interjected, her tone pitched to sound distressed. "Darling, you have been accepting invitations from a man you barely know, allowing him to send his carriage for you, attending events without chaperonage. People are beginning to talk. Lord Stratford may have honorable intentions, but his attention to you is causing exactly the sort of gossip we have worked so hard to prevent." The reversal was masterful. 2 years of deliberately destroying Verity's reputation were now reframed as attempts to protect it, with Verity's re-emergence into society presented as the actual source of scandal. Verity felt rage building, hot and pure, but she forced it down, knowing that displaying emotion would only confirm Vivian's narrative of instability. "The Earl of Stratford has shown me nothing but courtesy and respect," Verity said carefully. "His intentions appear to be those of someone who knew and admired my mother and wishes to honor her memory by offering kindness to her daughter. I see nothing scandalous in that." "You see nothing because you are naive," her father said heavily. "You do not understand how society judges these things. Vivian has explained to me how your behavior could be misconstrued, how accepting such particular attention from a wealthy earl might make you appear to be a fortune hunter, someone willing to use her mother's memory to manipulate a man's sympathies." The accusation was so breathtakingly unjust that Verity actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that made her father's eyes narrow. I am a fortune hunter? I, who have not been allowed to attend a social event in 2 years until I defied direct orders to do so? I, whose gowns have been locked away and whose invitations are burned before I can read them? Exactly how does one hunt fortune while imprisoned in one's own home? You see, Vivian said quickly, turning to Lord Reginald with wide, wounded eyes. This is exactly the sort of wild accusation I warned you about. She has convinced herself I am her enemy when I have only ever tried to protect her. It is the grief speaking, the instability that emerged after dear Helena passed. She needs rest and quiet, Reginald, not exposure to society that will only agitate her further. I am not unstable, Verity said, hearing her voice rise despite her best efforts to maintain control. I am desperate. There is a considerable difference. You have systematically destroyed my reputation through whispers and insinuation. You have prevented me from maintaining any connection to the world beyond these walls. You have taken every gown my mother helped me choose and locked them away so that when I do appear in society, I look shabby and forgotten. And now you dare to suggest that the Earl of Stratford's kindness to me is somehow scandalous, when the only scandal here is how you have treated me since the day you married my father. That is quite enough, Lord Reginald said, his face flushing with anger. You will apologize to Lady Ashcroft immediately for these insulting accusations. I will not, Verity said, and felt a strange exhilaration in the defiance, in finally saying aloud what she had kept silent for 2 years. Because they are not accusations. They are simple statements of fact. Ask the servants if my invitations arrive and where they go. Ask them what happened to my gowns. Ask them if I have been prevented from leaving this house for any purpose beyond the briefest, most supervised outings. The servants will say whatever you have coached them to say, Vivian interjected smoothly. You have always been clever at manipulation, Verity. Your mother spoiled you terribly, convinced you that you were special and deserving of constant attention. When she died and you were no longer the center of everyone's world, you could not accept it. This fantasy you have constructed, where I am some sort of villain keeping you prisoner, is simply your way of avoiding responsibility for your own failings. It was brilliantly done, Verity realized with sick admiration. Vivian had just reframed 2 years of abuse as a spoiled daughter's inability to cope with not being coddled, had transformed victim into villain and villain into concerned stepmother struggling with an ungrateful charge. And her father, who wanted desperately to believe in the woman he had married rather than confront the possibility that he had brought a monster into his home and given her power over his only child, would accept this narrative because it required nothing of him except continued passivity. I see, Verity said quietly, feeling something inside her go cold and hard. Then there is nothing more to say. You have decided what you wish to believe, and no evidence to the contrary will persuade you otherwise. She turned to leave, but her father's voice stopped her. You will cease accepting invitations from Lord Stratford, he said, and you will cease this campaign to embarrass this family with wild tales and unseemly behavior. If you cannot conduct yourself with appropriate dignity, I will have no choice but to restrict your movements further for your own protection. I am 21 years old, Verity said without turning around, and I have committed no crime. You cannot legally imprison me. I am your father and a viscount, Lord Reginald replied coldly. I can do a great many things, and the law will support me in protecting my own daughter from herself. Do not test me on this, Verity. She climbed the stairs to her room, aware that she had just made things considerably worse, that her defiance would be punished, that tomorrow would bring consequences she could not yet imagine. But she had also spoken truth aloud, had refused to apologize for wanting the respect of her station, and there was a strange power in that refusal, even knowing it would cost her dearly. The following morning brought clarity about what those costs would be. Verity woke to find her bedroom door locked from the outside, a development so brazen in its cruelty that she almost admired Vivian's audacity. A maid appeared at 8 o'clock with breakfast and an apologetic expression. "I am so sorry, miss," the girl whispered as she set down the tray. "Lady Ashcroft's orders. She says you are unwell and require rest away from disturbances. She has informed the household that you are not to have visitors and that any correspondence should be brought directly to her." "And my father supports this?" Verity asked, though she already knew the answer. The maid's expression was answer enough. "His lordship has been assured it is for your own good, miss, that you have been overwrought and require time to recover yourself. Lady Ashcroft can be very convincing when she wishes." After the maid left, Verity stood at her window, looking down at the street below, watching London go about its business while she was once again relegated to observer rather than participant. She wondered if Marcus would call today as he had the past 3 days. She wondered what he would be told when he arrived. She wondered if he would believe whatever lie Vivian concocted, if his interest in her well-being would survive the inconvenience of determined opposition. At precisely 4 o'clock, she heard the knocker sound below. From her window, she watched Marcus climb the steps, watched the door open, watched him speak briefly with the butler before being admitted. Her heart hammered. Would he ask to see her? Would he accept whatever excuse was offered? Would this be the moment when his interest faded in the face of complication? 20 minutes later, she heard raised voices from below, muffled by floors and walls, but unmistakably angry. Marcus's voice, demanding and insistent. Vivian's voice, pitched to carry distress and concern. Her father's voice, attempting authority and achieving only bluster. The argument continued for what felt like an eternity before she heard the front door close with rather more force than necessary. Verity sank onto her bed, fighting despair. He had tried. That was something. But he had also been turned away, and perhaps that would be the end of it. Perhaps he would decide she was too much trouble, too tangled in family complications he had no obligation to unravel. Perhaps tomorrow he would send polite regrets for his sister's upcoming event and quietly withdraw from whatever tentative connection had begun to form between them. She did not expect the pebble that struck her window an hour later. Verity jumped at the sound, pressing her face to the glass to peer down into the gathering dusk. In the narrow garden behind the house, barely visible among Vivian's severe hedges, stood Marcus, looking up at her window with an expression of grim determination. Her fingers fumbled with the window latch, years of disuse making it stick before finally yielding. She pushed the window open and leaned out, aware this was wildly improper and beyond caring. "Miss Ashcroft," Marcus called up, his voice pitched to carry to her, but not to the rest of the house. "I apologize for the unconventional approach. Your stepmother has informed me you are gravely ill and cannot receive visitors, yet you look remarkably healthy for someone at death's door." Despite everything, Verity felt laughter bubble up. "I am perfectly well, Lord Stratford, though I have been confined to my room for my own protection, I am told." "How convenient," Marcus said dryly. "I have also been informed that you wish no further contact with me, that my attentions have distressed you and you desire to be left in peace. Yet somehow I doubt those words came from your lips." "They did not," Verity confirmed. "I am apparently unwell, overwrought, and in need of isolation from all potentially agitating influences. My stepmother is quite concerned for my delicate mental state." "I see," Marcus said, and even from this distance she could sense the controlled fury of a man who had just had confirmed what he suspected. "Then I shall speak plainly, Miss Ashcroft, so there can be no misunderstanding. I know what is being done to you here. You are being deliberately isolated and systematically abused. I will not allow it to continue." "You cannot prevent it," Verity said, surprised by the defeat in her own voice. "My father supports her completely. The law gives him absolute authority over me until I marry, and I have no prospects of marriage after 2 years of carefully cultivated scandal. I am trapped, Lord Stratford. Your kindness has been extraordinary, But there are limits to what even an Earl can accomplish against a determined stepmother and a father who refuses to see truth. Then I shall have to change the fundamental circumstances, Marcus said. Miss Ashcroft, I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly, not as you think you should, but as you truly feel. Can you do that? I will endeavor to do so, Verity said, confused but willing. If you were free from this house, free from your stepmother's influence and your father's blindness, what would you choose for your life? Not what you think is possible, but what you actually want. The question was so unexpected, so outside the scope of any conversation Verity had considered, that for a moment she could only stare down at him. What did she want? The question itself felt revolutionary after 2 years of being told what she should want, what she was capable of wanting, what she deserved to hope for. I want my character to be known, she said finally, the words emerging raw and honest. Not as a disappointment or a burden or a source of shame. Not as someone to be managed or controlled or hidden away. I wish to be judged by my true merits rather than by the false colors in which I have been painted. I want to study my mother's journals on garden design and perhaps write something myself about her methods. I want to attend concerts and read controversial poetry and have conversations that challenge me to think. I want to wake up without dread. I want to live rather than merely endure. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Verity felt heat flood her face at having revealed so much. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. Those are reasonable wants, Miss Ashcroft. Modest even given the circumstances. And every one of them is achievable if you are willing to be remarkably brave for a very short time. What do you mean? I mean, I am going to call upon your father tomorrow and formally request permission to court you with intent toward marriage. He will refuse, obviously, because your stepmother will not permit him to do otherwise. But that refusal will establish clearly that you are being prevented from normal social engagement, not through your own choice, but through others' control. I will then make the same request publicly at Lady Pembroke's ball tomorrow night, where your father and stepmother will be in attendance. When he refuses publicly, it will create talk, questions about why a viscount would turn down an earl's interest in his daughter. Verity's heart was racing. That will only make Vivian more determined to keep me locked away. She will convince my father I am trying to entrap you, that I am using you somehow. Undoubtedly, Marcus agreed. Which is why the following morning, I am going to return with a special license and a carriage, and you are going to climb out that very window using a rope ladder I shall provide, and we are going to marry before anyone can prevent it. I have powerful connections who can expedite such a license for an appropriate fee. The words hung in the dusk-heavy air like something impossible and perfect and absolutely mad. Verity gripped the windowsill, trying to process what he was actually suggesting. You want to marry me, she said slowly, to rescue me from my stepmother. I want to marry you, Marcus corrected, because in the short time I have known you, I have found you to be intelligent, resilient, honest, and possessed of a quiet strength that has survived circumstances designed to break it. Because your mother was kind to an awkward young man who loved books more than people, and I see her grace and goodness reflected in you. Because you deserve better than what you have been given, and I have the power and resources to provide it. And yes, because extracting you from your stepmother's control requires marriage, and I would rather marry someone worthy of the privilege than some insipid diamond whose greatest accomplishment is looking decorative at balls. That is not a declaration of love, Verity said, needing to be clear, needing to understand exactly what was being offered and why. No, Marcus agreed. It is a declaration of respect, admiration, and determination. Love may come, or it may not. But mutual respect and shared values are a stronger foundation than passion that burns hot and fades quickly. I am offering you freedom, Miss Ashcroft, and partnership, and a life where you can pursue the wants you just described. In return, I ask for your honesty, your companionship, and your willingness to build something worthwhile together. Is that enough? Verity thought about her mother's marriage, built on deep love, but also profound friendship. She thought about 2 more years, or 5, or 10, trapped in this house while Vivian systematically destroyed anything good that tried to reach her. She thought about Marcus's gathering, the conversations that engaged her mind, Eleanor's warm acceptance, the simple joy of being treated as though she had value and worth. "Yes," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "That is enough, more than enough. Then tomorrow night at Lady Pembroke's ball, when I make my very public request and your father refuses, do not look defeated. Look proud. Look like a woman who knows her worth even when those who should protect her fail to recognize it. Can you do that?" "I can," Verity said, and meant it. "Good," Marcus said, satisfaction clear in his voice. "The day after tomorrow at dawn, I will be in this garden with a rope ladder, a carriage, and a special license. Bring only what you can carry in a small bag. Everything else can be replaced." He bowed, a formal gesture that should have looked absurd in the garden at dusk, but instead looked like a promise being sealed. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Verity alone at her window, with her heart pounding and her mind racing, and something very much like joy beginning to bloom in her chest. Lady Pembroke's ball was the event of the season, attended by everyone of consequence and many who merely wished to be. Verity was brought under protest, Vivian having argued extensively that Verity was not well enough to attend. But Lord Reginald, perhaps feeling some faint stirring of paternal responsibility after locking his daughter in her room for 24 hours, had insisted that fresh air and controlled society would do her good. Controlled was the operative word. Verity was not to leave Vivian's side. She was not to dance. She was not to engage in any conversation that might prove taxing to her delicate constitution. She was to be decorative, silent, and thoroughly managed. Verity wore a gown that Vivian had chosen, a pale yellow that did nothing for her coloring and was styled in a way that made her look younger and more fragile than her years. It was deliberate, she knew, another way of diminishing her, of making her appear as the unstable, childish creature Vivian insisted she was. Marcus arrived fashionably late, Eleanor on his arm, both of them cutting striking figures as they entered the ballroom. His eyes found Verity immediately, and she saw him assess her appearance, the poorly chosen gown, the way Vivian's hand rested on her arm like a shackle disguised as support. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. He made conversation with their hosts, spoke briefly with several acquaintances, and then crossed the ballroom with Eleanor, his path deliberate and clear. Vivian's hand tightened on Verity's arm as he approached. "Lord Ashcroft," Marcus said, bowing to Verity's father with perfect courtesy. "Lady Ashcroft, Miss Ashcroft, what a pleasure to see you this evening." "Lord Stratford," Lord Reginald replied stiffly. "I trust you are well." "Exceedingly well," Marcus said. "In fact, I find myself in a particularly optimistic frame of mind this evening. Which brings me to a matter I wish to discuss with you, Lord Ashcroft. A matter of some significance that I believe is best addressed publicly, given the importance I place upon it." Lord Reginald looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing he was being maneuvered, but uncertain how to extract himself gracefully. "Perhaps this is not the appropriate venue for such discussions, Lord Stratford." "On the contrary," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly to the nearby guests who had begun to pay attention to the exchange. "I can think of no better venue. Lord Ashcroft, I wish to formally request your permission to court your daughter with the explicit intention of proposing marriage should our courtship prove as agreeable to her as I hope it will be." The ballroom did not fall silent, exactly, but there was a definite hush as conversations faltered and attention swiveled toward them. This was gossip of the highest order. The Earl of Stratford, who had refused every overture from marriage-minded families for years, publicly declaring interest in a woman whose reputation had been thoroughly damaged by whispers. Lord Reginald's face flushed. "Lord Stratford, I appreciate the honor you do our family. but I must decline. My daughter is not ready for courtship at this time. Her recent behavior has demonstrated a need for guidance and stability that courtship would only disrupt. Recent behavior? Marcus inquired mildly. You refer, I assume, to her attendance at several respectable social events where her conduct was impeccable and her company much sought after? Or perhaps to her extensive knowledge of botany and landscape design, which has proven valuable in consultations regarding my own estate? I confess I am at a loss to understand what behavior you find so concerning. My daughter has been unwell, Lord Reginald said, the rehearsed words emerging stiff and unconvincing. She requires rest and protection from undue excitement. Courtship would be inappropriate at this time. Forgive me, Marcus said, and his tone had gone cold enough to make frost. But Miss Ashcroft appears to be in excellent health. Indeed, she has attended multiple events recently without showing any signs of the fragility you describe. Unless you are suggesting that courtship from an earl is somehow more dangerous to her well-being than courtship from less prominent gentlemen. Though I note she has received no callers at all in recent months, which suggests the concern is not courtship in general, but specifically courtship that might lead to marriage, and thus remove her from your household. It was a direct accusation, thinly veiled as inquiry, and murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Lord Reginald's flush deepened, but before he could respond, Vivian intervened with her most convincing performance of wounded dignity. Lord Stratford, I understand you feel you are acting honorably, but you do not know Verity as we do. She has suffered terribly since her mother's death, and her grief has manifested in ways that concern us deeply. We wish only to protect her until she has recovered herself sufficiently to make sound judgments about her future. Surely you can understand our caution, given the significant difference in your stations and the speed with which you have developed this interest? I understand, Marcus said, that a woman of 21 years who has committed no crime and shown no actual evidence of instability is being prevented from normal social engagement by a stepmother who benefits considerably from maintaining control over her. I understand that every rumor about Miss Ashcroft's supposed impropriety originates from the same small circle of gossips closely connected to you, Lady Ashcroft. And I understand that a father who truly wished to protect his daughter's well-being would welcome interest from a respectable suitor, rather than rejecting it out of hand while offering no credible explanation. The murmurs had become whispers, urgent and speculative. This was scandal of the best kind, the kind that called into question established narratives and suggested hidden cruelties in respectable households. Vivian's expression flickered, the mask of concern slipping just slightly to reveal the fury beneath. You overstep, Lord Stratford, Lord Reginald said, attempting authority. I am Verity's father. My decisions regarding her welfare are mine to make, and I do not require your approval or understanding. You are correct, Marcus said. They are your decisions, but they are also decisions that will be observed and judged by society. I have made my interest clear and honorable. You have refused without cause that withstands scrutiny. People will draw their own conclusions about why a father would reject such an offer, and I suspect those conclusions will not reflect well on your household. He turned to Verity then, and the coldness in his expression warmed to something gentler. Miss Ashcroft, I am sorry you have been placed in this position. Please know that my regard for you is unchanged, and should circumstances alter such that you are free to accept courtship, my interest will not have wavered. It was permission to hope, offered publicly enough that everyone present understood the implication. If Verity found herself suddenly able to accept callers, if her father's refusal somehow became acceptance, Marcus would be waiting. But it was also something else, a clear statement that he saw her father's refusal as temporary, as something that would change. Thank you, Lord Stratford, Verity said, lifting her chin and meeting his eyes with all the pride he had asked her to show. Your kindness has been a source of great comfort in difficult times. I am honored by your regard. It was perfectly proper, but the subtext was clear to everyone watching. She did not defer to her father's judgment. She did not apologize for Marcus's interest or suggest it was inappropriate. She stood straight and spoke with dignity, and in doing so, contradicted every whisper that painted her as unstable or improper. Marcus bowed and withdrew, Eleanor shooting Verity a look of fierce approval as she passed. The crowd around them buzzed with speculation, and Verity could feel her father's rage radiating like heat, could feel Vivian's fury vibrating through the hand still clamped on her arm. "We are leaving," Lord Reginald said through clenched teeth. "Immediately." The carriage ride home was silent, except for Vivian's sharp breathing and Lord Reginald's muttered curses. Verity said nothing, conserving her energy for what tomorrow would bring. When they arrived at Ashcroft House, she expected to be locked in her room again, but instead her father ordered her to the library with a tone that brooked no argument. She followed him into the book-lined room, Vivian trailing behind with an expression of satisfaction poorly disguised as concern. Lord Reginald poured himself a large brandy, drained it. He then poured another. "You have embarrassed this family," he said finally. "You have conspired with that man to humiliate me publicly, to make me appear a tyrant when I am simply trying to protect you from making a disastrous mistake." "What mistake?" Verity asked, genuinely curious what explanation he had constructed. "Marrying an Earl? Accepting courtship from a man of impeccable reputation and considerable wealth? Exactly what disaster am I being protected from?" "You do not know him," Lord Reginald said. "He is using you to cause scandal, to entertain himself with this romantic rescue narrative. Once the novelty fades, you will be left with a man who pities you rather than loves you, trapped in a marriage contracted for all the wrong reasons. As opposed to being trapped in this house, unmarried and isolated, until I am so thoroughly ruined by rumor that no one will have me at all," Verity shot back. "At least marriage to Lord Stratford offers possibility of companionship and respect. What does remaining here offer except more years of imprisonment?" "You see," Vivian interjected, turning to Lord Reginald with wide eyes. "This is exactly the sort of wild exaggeration I warned you about. She calls her own home a prison, accuses us of cruelty when we have shown her nothing but concern. This is the instability Lord Stratford refuses to see because he is too enamored of his own heroic fantasy." "Is it exaggeration?" Verity demanded, her control finally cracking under the weight of 2 years accumulated injustice. "You have locked me in my room. You have burned my invitations. You have hidden my gowns and spread vicious rumors and prevented me from maintaining any connection to the world beyond these walls. What would you call that if not imprisonment?" "I would call it necessary intervention for a young woman who was spiraling into inappropriate behavior after her mother's death," Vivian said smoothly. "You became fixated on unsuitable men, Verity. You made spectacles of yourself at the few events you attended. We had to protect you from your own poor judgment." "Name one unsuitable man I was fixated on," Verity challenged. "Name one spectacle I created." "You cannot, because none of it happened. You have fabricated an entire narrative of instability to justify isolating me, and you have convinced my father to accept that narrative because it absolves him of having to acknowledge what you truly are." "And what am I?" Vivian asked, her voice going dangerously soft. "Please, enlighten us with your assessment of my character." "You are a woman who married my father for his title and resented finding a daughter in the bargain," Verity said, years of suppressed truth pouring out in a torrent she could no longer control. "You hated that he loved my mother more than he could ever love you, hated that her portrait hangs in this house, hated that her gardens were praised and her memory cherished. And most of all, you hated me because I am living proof that his first marriage was happier than his second could ever be. So you set about destroying me systematically, ensuring I would never marry well, never leave this house to establish my own household, never have children who might inherit over any you might produce. You have tried to erase me the way you erased my mother's gardens, and you have done it all while playing the concerned stepmother so convincingly that my own father believes you over his daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Reginald stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time, his face pale. Vivian's expression had gone utterly cold, the mask of concern abandoned entirely. "You ungrateful little wretch," she said softly. "I have tolerated your presence in this house out of duty to your father. I have endured your sullen resentment and your constant comparisons to your sainted mother. And this is how you repay my patience? With wild accusations and paranoid fantasies?" "Vivian," Lord Reginald said, and something in his tone made both women look at him. He was staring at his second wife with an expression Verity had never seen before, something that might have been the beginning of doubt. "Is any of this true? Have you been spreading rumors about Verity?" "Of course not," Vivian said. But there was the slightest hesitation before the denial, the smallest crack in her performance. "I have tried to protect her reputation as best I could, but you know how society talks. I cannot control every gossip's tongue." "But Lady Sutherland is your friend," Lord Reginald said slowly, as though working through a puzzle. "And Mrs. Fairchild, and the others who have whispered about Verity's supposed impropriety. They are all women you meet with regularly, women who would hear anything you might say about Verity's behavior or health." "Are you actually suggesting I have been deliberately damaging my own stepdaughter's reputation?" Vivian demanded, and her outrage would have been convincing if not for the flash of panic in her eyes. "After everything I have sacrificed to try to guide her through her grief and instability?" "What have you sacrificed?" Verity asked quietly. "Name one thing, one single thing you have given up for my benefit." Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, then rallied. "My time, my patience, my social standing, which has suffered from association with a stepdaughter who cannot control her emotional displays." "Your social standing has suffered because people see through you," Verity said. "They see a woman who married a grieving widower and immediately set about erasing his first wife from existence, who transformed beloved gardens into geometric severity, who isolated his daughter and convinced him it was for her own good. You have been subtle, I will grant you that. Brilliant, even, in how you have manipulated appearances. But Lord Stratford sees you, and tomorrow, so will everyone else." "What do you mean tomorrow?" Lord Reginald demanded. "What happens tomorrow?" But Verity simply smiled, a small secret smile that made Vivian's eyes narrow with suspicion. "Tomorrow you will discover that there are limits to what even you can control, stepmother, and that some rescues, no matter how dramatically they might be dismissed as fantasy, prove to be quite real." She left them in the library, climbed the stairs to her room, and was unsurprised to hear the lock turn behind her once again. But this time, the locked door felt different, not like the walls of a prison, but like the final night before liberation, the last darkness before dawn. She packed her small bag with care, taking only what mattered: her mother's journals, a few pieces of jewelry that had been her mother's, a miniature portrait of her parents in happier times. Everything else, as Marcus had said, could be replaced. Sleep eluded her despite exhaustion, her mind racing through possibilities and fears. What if Marcus changed his mind? What if her father posted guards? What if Vivian discovered the plan and prevented it? But beneath the anxiety ran a current of something stronger: determination. She had been passive for 2 years, accepting her imprisonment because she saw no alternative. Tomorrow she would choose action, would claim the freedom being offered, would step into uncertainty rather than remain in misery. Dawn came cold and gray, the first light barely touching the horizon when she heard the soft sound of something hitting her window. Verity was already dressed in her most practical gown, her bag packed and ready. She opened the window to find Marcus in the garden below, a rope ladder in his hands and a smile on his face. "Good morning, Miss Ashcroft," he called up softly. "I trust you are ready for an adventure." "More ready than I have ever been for anything," she called back, and meant it absolutely. The rope ladder proved more challenging than anticipated, her hands clumsy with nerves and lack of practice at such activities. But Marcus steadied the bottom, murmuring encouragement, and after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, her feet touched solid ground. "Well done," he said, and there was such warmth in his voice, such genuine approval, that Verity felt tears prick her eyes. "The carriage is waiting on the next street. Can you run?" "I can fly if necessary," Verity said, gripping her bag tightly. They made their way through the garden and out a gate that Marcus had apparently unlocked earlier, emerging onto a quiet side street where an unmarked carriage waited with Eleanor inside. Eleanor pulled Verity up and into the carriage with surprising strength, then hugged her fiercely. "That was magnificently done," Eleanor said. "I was watching from here terrified you would fall and break your neck before we could even get you away from that house." Marcus swung into the carriage, calling directions to the driver, and they lurched into motion with speed, suggesting the horses were fresh, and the driver informed of the need for urgency. Verity looked back once at Ashcroft House, at the window of the room where she had been locked away, and felt no regret. Only relief so profound, it was almost painful. "Where are we going?" she asked. "St. George's in Hanover Square," Marcus said, producing a folded document from his coat. "I have the special license, and I have arranged for a vicar to meet us there at 6 o'clock. We will be married before your father even wakes, and by the time he discovers your absence, you will be my wife and legally beyond his control." "That seems remarkably efficient," Verity said, and was pleased her voice remained steady despite the enormity of what she was doing. "I possess a certain facility for planning," Marcus said dryly. "It is one of my more useful traits. That and extreme stubbornness when I have decided something is worth pursuing." The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Eleanor and the vicar's wife, conducted in the gray light of early morning in the beautiful church. Verity spoke her vows in a clear voice, surprised to find her hands steady as Marcus slipped a ring onto her finger. His own voice was equally steady, his gray-green eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the simple words feel weighted with meaning beyond their legal function. "I, Marcus Edmund Harcourt, take thee, Verity Caroline Ashcroft, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, love and cherish." He had been honest that he offered respect rather than romance, partnership rather than passion. But there was care in how he spoke the words, a seriousness that suggested he meant to honor them regardless of the unconventional circumstances of their marriage. And then it was done. She was Verity Harcourt, Countess of Stratford, wife to a man she had known for less than 2 weeks, but trusted more than she had trusted anyone since her mother's death. They signed the register, accepted congratulations from the vicar, and emerged into morning light that seemed brighter than when they had entered. "What happens now?" Verity asked as they settled back into the carriage, Eleanor having diplomatically chosen to ride in a separate vehicle to give them privacy. "Now I take you to Stratford House, where you will have breakfast and rest while I call upon your father to inform him of our marriage," Marcus said. "He will be furious. Vivian will be apoplectic, and society will be absolutely riveted by the scandal of an earl running off with a viscount's daughter in the night." "That does not concern you?" Verity asked. "The scandal? Not particularly," Marcus said. "I have spent my entire adult life avoiding scandal through caution and careful social management. It becomes rather exhausting, always calculating appearances, always conscious of judgment. This morning I helped my wife escape through a window using a rope ladder, married her at dawn with a special license, and will shortly be informing her father that his control over her is permanently ended. I find I rather enjoy the liberation of simply doing what is right rather than what is proper." His wife. The words sent a strange flutter through Verity's chest. "I am your wife," she said, testing how it felt to speak aloud. "That will require a significant adjustment." "We have time for adjustment," Marcus said. "We are not returning to London society for several months. I am taking you to Stratford Abbey in Derbyshire, where you can recover from 2 years of imprisonment without the pressure of managing social appearances. You can explore the grounds, examine the library, plan garden improvements using your mother's journals. You can simply be without anyone watching or judging or attempting to control you. It sounded like paradise. What about my father? And Vivian? Your father will eventually accept the marriage because he has no choice, Marcus said. Vivian will rage and plot and ultimately fail because her power was built entirely on control over you. And that control is now broken. She cannot damage your reputation as my wife the way she damaged it as her stepdaughter. She cannot isolate you or spread rumors that will be taken seriously when you are a countess with my protection. Her weapon has been taken from her, and without it, she is simply a bitter woman married to a man who may finally begin to question whether he made a terrible mistake. The confrontation with Lord Reginald occurred at Ashcroft House at 9 o'clock, and Marcus insisted Verity accompany him despite her misgivings. You are not a child being discussed by adults, he said firmly. You are my wife, and this concerns you directly. You will be present. Her father received them in the library, Vivian at his side, both looking as though they had not slept. Lord Reginald's face was gray, his eyes bloodshot. Vivian's expression was carefully controlled, but Verity could see the fury burning beneath the surface. You went too far this time, Lord Reginald said without preamble. Breaking into my house, kidnapping my daughter. This is beyond acceptable behavior, even for an earl. I broke into nothing, Marcus said calmly. Your daughter climbed out her window of her own free will, choosing freedom over imprisonment. And as of 6 o'clock this morning, she is no longer your daughter in any legal sense. She is my wife, the Countess of Stratford, and entirely beyond your authority. The words hung in the air like a bell's toll. Lord Reginald's face went from gray to purple, and Vivian made a small, wounded sound that might have been convincing if Verity had not seen the calculation in her eyes. You cannot have married her, Vivian said. The bans require 3 weeks' reading. You would need special license from the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, and that requires significant cause. I have significant resources and significant determination, Marcus replied. Both proved sufficient to obtain what was necessary. The marriage is legal, properly witnessed and recorded. Nothing you can do will change that fact. You have ruined her, Lord Reginald said, his voice shaking. Married in haste, no family present, the scandal will follow her forever. The scandal was already following her, Marcus said coldly. Thanks to rumors your wife spread systematically for 2 years. At least now she has my name and protection to shield her from the worst of it. And I suspect most of society will view this as a romantic rescue rather than a scandal, especially once I make clear exactly what Verity was being rescued from. You know nothing, Vivian hissed, her control finally cracking. You see a pretty girl who plays the victim convincingly, and you construct some fantasy where I am the villain. Verity has been unstable since her mother's death. Everything I did was to protect her from herself and protect this family from her episodes. Then you will have no objection to my speaking with the servants, Marcus said, asking them about locked doors and hidden invitations and burned gowns, consulting with Lady Ravendale about invitations sent that never reached Verity, examining the pattern of exactly who spread which rumors and tracing them back to their source. I am a patient man, Lady Ashcroft, and thorough when I investigate. By the time I am done, society will know precisely what you are and what you have done. This is outrageous, Lord Reginald said, but there was less heat in his protest now, more uncertainty. He was looking at Vivian with something that might have been the beginning of real doubt. What is outrageous? Verity said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the room, is that my own father locked me in my room like a criminal, that he believed every lie told about me without once asking if they might be false, that he allowed his second wife to systematically destroy his first wife's memory and his only child's future. You failed me, Father, utterly and completely. And now you must live with that knowledge while I go forward with a man who saw my worth when you refused to." Lord Reginald flinched as though struck. "Verity, I only wanted to protect you." "You wanted peace," Verity corrected gently. "You wanted to believe Vivian's explanations because questioning them would have required confronting uncomfortable truths about the woman you married and your own failure of judgment. I understand that impulse toward self-preservation, Father, but I can no longer sacrifice myself to maintain your illusions." She turned to Vivian then, meeting those cold blue eyes with hard-won composure. "You tried to break me. You tried to make me believe I was worthless, that I deserved isolation and contempt. You almost succeeded. But you made one critical mistake. You underestimated how much my mother's love had strengthened me, how deeply she had instilled the knowledge that I had value regardless of others' recognition of it. That foundation proved stronger than your hatred, and now I am beyond your reach entirely." "You think you have won," Vivian said softly, and there was something almost admiring in her tone beneath the fury. "But you have simply traded one prison for another. You have married a man you barely know, and when the romance of rescue fades, you will find yourself trapped in a different cage." "Perhaps," Verity acknowledged, "but it will be a cage I chose, with a man who has shown me kindness and respect. That is more than you ever offered, and more than I could hope for if I remained here." Marcus took her hand, the gesture possessive but also protective. His grasp was a solid reassurance of their shared purpose. "We are leaving London today for Stratford Abbey. Verity needs time away from this house and its associations. We will return to society when we are ready, not before." "You cannot simply take her away," Lord Reginald protested weakly. "I can do precisely that," Marcus said. "She is my wife. Where she goes and when is no longer your concern. I suggest you use the time while we are away to reflect carefully on the choices that led to this moment, and on whether you wish to salvage any relationship with your daughter or permanently sever what little remains." They left Ashcroft House together, Verity's hand clasped firmly in Marcus's, and she did not look back. Behind them she heard raised voices, her father's confusion, and Vivian's rage bleeding through despite the closed door. But it no longer mattered. She was free. Life at Stratford Abbey proved to be everything Marcus had promised, and more. The estate sprawled across Derbyshire countryside with a beauty that took Verity's breath, all rolling hills and ancient trees, and a house that managed to be both grand and welcoming. Eleanor had traveled ahead and greeted them with warm embraces and clear relief that the escape had gone smoothly. The first weeks were strange, a period of adjustment where Verity learned to navigate the enormous freedom of her new circumstances. She was expected nowhere, required to do nothing, free to spend her days as she chose. It was intoxicating and occasionally terrifying, this sudden absence of restriction. Marcus gave her space, respecting the foreignness of their marriage while establishing a foundation of companionship. They took breakfast together and discussed their plans for the day. They walked the grounds, and he listened with genuine interest as she pointed out places where her mother's garden design principles could be applied. They spent evenings in the library, reading in comfortable silence or engaging in conversations that ranged from politics to poetry to the philosophical questions that had no easy answers. Slowly, carefully, a deep friendship and understanding began to grow, something that was not quite love, but was perhaps its foundation: trust, respect, shared laughter. Marcus had a dry wit that caught her off guard, drawing laughter from places she had thought Vivian had killed. Eleanor visited frequently, bringing gossip from London and frank assessments of Verity's progress. "You are blooming," Eleanor observed one afternoon as they walked through what would become new gardens, still just plans and stakes in the ground, but full of promise. "When I first saw you at that ball, you looked like a flower that had been kept in the dark too long, pale and fragile. Now you have color in your cheeks and light in your eyes. Marriage agrees with you." "Freedom agrees with me," Verity corrected, but smiled. "Though I grant that Marcus has made that freedom possible in ways I could not have achieved alone." My brother is remarkable once one gets past his tendency toward excessive reserve and his absolute refusal to suffer fools, Eleanor said. He has been alone too long, I think. Too comfortable with solitude. Your company proves beneficial to him, Verity. He smiles more, laughs more readily. You have brought warmth into a house that was beginning to feel rather cold and dutiful. It was 3 months before they returned to London, Marcus having judged that sufficient time for the initial scandal to die down and transform into romantic legend. They entered society as a married couple, and Verity found the experience entirely different from her previous forays into ballrooms and drawing rooms. As the Countess of Stratford, she commanded respect that had been denied Miss Ashcroft. The same women who had whispered about her supposed instability now courted her favor. Invitations flooded Stratford House, everyone eager to host the Earl who had staged such a dramatic rescue, and the bride who had escaped through a window at dawn. The gossip had shifted as well. Investigation by several influential matrons had revealed the pattern of rumors, all originating from Vivian's circle. Lady Sutherland, confronted by the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough about her role in spreading malicious gossip, had broken down and admitted Vivian had fed her information designed to damage Verity's reputation. The admission had cost Lady Sutherland her own social standing and, more importantly, had revealed Vivian's machinations to scrutiny. Lord Reginald appeared at Stratford House one afternoon, 6 months after the marriage, looking older and more uncertain than Verity remembered. Marcus received him courteously, but without warmth, making clear that any reconciliation would depend entirely on Verity's willingness. "I owe you an apology," her father said without preamble, his hands twisting his hat with nervous energy. "I failed you, Verity. I believed lies because they were easier than truth. I allowed my wife to mistreat you because acknowledging her cruelty would have required me to face my own poor judgment in marrying her. I mistook her control for your mother's guiding strength. I was weak and selfish, and you suffered for it." "Yes," Verity said simply, "because it was true, and pretending otherwise would help neither of them. You were all those things. The question is whether you have changed or whether you simply regret the consequences of your actions." "Both," Lord Reginald admitted. "I regret deeply what happened to you, but I have also spent these months examining my choices and their causes. Vivian reminded me of aspects of your mother, you see. The confidence, the certainty in her own judgment. But where your mother's certainty came from compassion and wisdom, Vivian's came from selfishness and manipulation. I mistook the surface similarity for true resemblance. And I compounded that error by refusing to see the differences when they became apparent." "Where is Vivian now?" Verity asked. "Gone," Lord Reginald said heavily. After the extent of her gossip campaign became known, she found herself unwelcome in society. "We have separated, though not divorced. She lives in a small estate I settled on her, and I do not expect we shall ever reconcile. I have paid dearly for my poor judgment, Verity, but not as dearly as you nearly did." Verity felt an unexpected softness toward this deeply remorseful man who had been her father before Vivian had poisoned everything. "I do not know if we can repair what was damaged," she said honestly. "But I am willing to try, slowly, if you are prepared to accept that trust must be earned rather than assumed." "I am," Lord Reginald said, and there were tears in his eyes. "And I am grateful for even the possibility, daughter, more grateful than you can know." The rebuilding proceeded deliberately, accomplished through careful visits and cautious conversations. Lord Reginald met his grandchildren when they arrived, first Helena, and then Reginald Marcus, and Verity saw his joy at being permitted into their lives, tempered by knowledge of how easily he might have lost that privilege entirely. 3 years after her marriage, Verity stood in the completed gardens at Stratford Abbey, Helena toddling among the flowers while her son, Reginald Marcus, slept in his father's arms nearby. The gardens were beautiful, a perfect blend of her mother's naturalistic philosophy and the formal structure appropriate to an earl's estate. They would be her legacy, these gardens, and the journals she was writing about their design and her mother's principles. Marcus approached, carefully maneuvering their sleeping son, and stood beside her, looking out over the landscape they had created together. "Happy?" he asked, the question he had taken to asking periodically, as though checking that the freedom he had offered continued to satisfy. "Very," Verity said, and meant it absolutely. "I have everything I wanted that night I climbed out my window. Freedom to be seen and known, work that engages my mind, children to love, a partner who respects me, and gardens that would have made my mother proud." "Your mother would be proud of considerably more than the gardens," Marcus said quietly. "She would be proud of the strength you showed in surviving Vivian's attempts to break you. Proud of the courage it took to accept rescue from a near stranger. Proud of the woman you have become despite every attempt to prevent it." "I could not have become this woman alone," Verity said, leaning against his shoulder carefully so as not to wake their son. "You gave me the foundation to build from. Safety and space and belief that I had worth." "You always had worth," Marcus corrected. "I simply provided circumstances where it could not be denied or hidden. The strength was yours, Verity. I merely ensured it had room to flourish." Far away, in her small estate in the country, Vivienne lived alone with her bitterness and her schemes that had all come to nothing. Lord Reginald occasionally sent money but never visited, their separation complete if not legally formalized. She had lost everything in her attempt to destroy Verity: social standing, marriage, the power she had wielded through manipulation and rumor. Verity's world was now filled with the sight of her daughter among the flowers and the sound of her son's breathing. Her focus was on the life she was building, the children she was raising, the work that fulfilled her. She had learned that holding on to anger toward those who wronged you gave them continued power over your peace. Better to acknowledge the damage, learn from it, and then release it in favor of gratitude for what had come after. Sometimes, walking through her gardens in the golden light of afternoon with her daughter's hand in hers and her husband's steady presence nearby, Verity thought about that terrified girl climbing out a window at dawn, choosing uncertainty over safety, risk over resignation. That girl had been brave in a way Verity could now fully appreciate. Brave in a way that had changed everything. The gardens grew more beautiful each season, their natural wildness governed but not eradicated, their beauty an invitation rather than an imposition. Just as her mother had envisioned, just as Verity had planned, just as Marcus had supported. And Verity, who had once been a prisoner in her own home, was finally, completely, wonderfully free. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of courage, second chances, and love that sees beyond society's cruelty touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of resilience, hope, and the triumph of genuine goodness over calculated evil.